I keep the envelope in a gallon-sized Ziploc bag now. The kind you'd use for sandwiches. It sits in the top drawer of my nightstand, underneath my spare phone charger and a tube of hand lotion I never use. My husband knows it's there. He's never asked me to move it. The envelope itself is nothing. Cream-colored, the kind you buy in bulk from Costco. My grandfather's handwriting on the front. My name, Natalie, in the careful cursive of a man who learned to write before ballpoint pens were common. The seal was broken a long time ago. The paper inside is folded into thirds, soft at the creases from how many times I've opened and closed it. My brother ripped it in half at our grandfather's wake. He didn't even pause, didn't look at me. He just took it out of my hand the way you'd take a candy wrapper from a child, tore it straight down the middle, and dropped both pieces on the catering table next to a tray of untouched finger sandwiches. "Grandpa was sweet," he said, already turning away, but he didn't have anything worth reading. 500 people in that room. Aunts, uncles, neighbors, people who'd driven 3 hours from Savannah. My grandfather had lived a long life, and people had come from everywhere to say goodbye. And my brother stood there in his navy suit with the pocket square that matched his wife's dress, and he tore my grandfather's last letter to me in half like it was a grocery receipt. I didn't cry. I want you to know that. I picked up both pieces, held them against my chest, and I walked to the bathroom at the end of the hall, and I sat on the closed lid of a toilet in a funeral home bathroom, and I taped my grandfather's letter back together with a strip of Scotch tape I found in the bottom of my purse. That's who I was then. The kind of woman who carries Scotch tape in her purse and cries in bathroom stalls and tapes things back together alone. My grandfather's name was Harold. Everyone called him Pop. He was 81 years old when he died in February, and he had spent the last 3 years of his life in a small house in Decatur, Georgia, 20 minutes from where I grew up. He had a vegetable garden that he tended until he couldn't, a dog named Biscuit who outlived him by 4 months, and a habit of pressing folded bills into your palm when he hugged you goodbye, even when you were 32 years old and told him you didn't need it. He was not a wealthy man. That's what my family believed. That's what my brother believed so completely that he didn't bother to read a dead man's letter to his granddaughter. My brother's name is Trevor. He's 6 years older than me, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fills a room without trying. He was always our mother's favorite in the way that no one in the family ever said out loud, but everyone understood completely. He went to Georgia Tech on a partial scholarship, married a woman named Sasha who color coordinates their Christmas cards, and had built himself a life that looked from the outside like he had everything figured out. He was also, for the last several years, completely broke. I didn't know this at the time of the funeral. I found out later, the way you find out most things about the people who are supposed to be closest to you, sideways, through other people, too late to matter. What I knew at the funeral was this. My grandfather had left the letter for me specifically. His attorney had called me the week before the wake to let me know. A woman named Linda, professional and warm, who told me there was a letter designated for me and that I could pick it up at the office after the service if I wanted. Or Pop had asked that it be delivered to me personally by the estate administrator. He was very specific, Linda said. He wanted you to have it before anything else was settled. I thought it was a sentimental letter. Pop was like that. He used to write me notes on my birthday even after I was grown. Real handwritten letters about what he remembered from the year I was born. What the weather was like, what song was on the radio. I still have all of them. I thought this was the last one. I didn't tell Trevor about the call from Linda. The wake was held at Callaway & Sons, the same funeral home that had handled my grandmother's service 11 years before. The family arrived an hour early for photographs, and then stood near the front as the room filled. Trevor stood with Sasha on one side of my mother, I stood on the other. My husband Ryan stayed close to me the whole night. He had his hand on the small of my back for most of 3 hours, and I don't think he knew how much that mattered. Linda arrived near the end of the receiving line, introduced herself quietly, pressed an envelope into my hands. "From Harold," she said. "He made me promise to get it to you today." I held it with both hands. I hadn't expected it to feel like anything. It felt like something. Trevor appeared at my elbow 20 minutes later, when the crowd had thinned near the catering table. He looked at the envelope the way he looked at most things that weren't his, with mild irritation. "What's that?" "A letter," I said. "From Pop, from the lawyer." "She delivered it, yes." He held out his hand, not asking, just expecting, the way he always had. "Let me see. It's addressed to me, Trevor. I'm his grandson, Natalie." He said it like that settled something. And then he took it. I don't know why I let him. I've asked myself that question in the 18 months since, and the truest answer I can give is that I had spent my entire life watching Trevor take things and not fighting him, and my grandfather's body was 30 feet away in a mahogany casket, and I was not capable, in that moment, of being the version of myself who fights back. He tore it in half without opening it. I found out later that he had seen Linda hand it to me from across the room, that he had assumed it contained information about the estate, that he was afraid of what it might say. He had reason to be afraid. I taped the letter back together in the bathroom. My hands were shaking slightly, not from crying, just from the effort of keeping myself very still inside. I smoothed both pieces onto the counter next to the sink, lined up the tear as carefully as I could, and ran the tape along the back. The letter was 2 pages. Pop's handwriting, neat and unhurried. The first page was what I expected. He told me he was proud of me. He said I had my grandmother's eyes and her stubbornness, which he meant as a compliment. He said he hoped I'd stop apologizing so much for taking up space. He said Ryan was a good man, and he could tell by how Ryan looked at me. The second page was not what I expected. He had written, "I set something aside for you in 1987. I never told your father. I never told your uncle. I told your rumbler, and she agreed with me. It was always meant for you, Natalie. Not because your brother didn't deserve love, but because I could see, even when you were small, that no one was going to hand you anything. I wanted you to have a foundation. I wanted you to have options. The account is at First Heritage Bank in Decatur, branch on Commerce Drive. My attorney Linda has the documentation. All you have to do is go." That was it. No amount, no details. Just go. I read it 4 times in that bathroom. Then I folded it back along the tape line and put it in my purse next to the Scotch tape, and I went back out to my grandfather's wake, and I stood next to my mother, and I did not say one word to Trevor for the rest of the night. Ryan found me by the coat rack near the end. He looked at my face and didn't ask any questions. He just said, "Ready?" And I said yes, and we drove home in the dark with the radio off. I went to First Heritage Bank on a Tuesday, 11 days after the funeral. I had called Linda the morning after the wake. She confirmed everything. There was an account in my name, a payable-on-death account that had been established in 1987 and updated periodically over the years. She said the documentation was all in order and that I could go to the branch with my ID and she would call ahead to let them know. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not my mother, not my best friend, not even Ryan, until the night before, when I finally showed him the taped-together letter by the kitchen light and watched his face move through about 6 different expressions in 30 seconds. "Natalie," he said. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to be sure it was real first." I paused. "I'm still not sure it's real." He drove me to the bank. The branch on Commerce Drive is a small one, the kind that still has a candy dish on the teller counter and a bulletin board near the door with community flyers. A woman named Deborah was at the front desk when we came in. Linda had called ahead. Deborah asked for my ID, typed something into her computer, and then stopped typing. She looked at her screen. She looked at me. She picked up the phone on her desk and said, very quietly, to whoever answered, "I need you to come up front. Yes, now." Ryan put his hand on mine. A man in a grey suit came out from the back office. He introduced himself as the branch manager. He looked at my ID. He looked at his computer. He looked at me again with the expression of someone trying to keep their face professional while their brain is doing something completely different. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, "would you like to come sit down?" My grandfather had opened a payable-on-death savings account in my name in 1987. I was 6 years old. He had made regular deposits for years, not large amounts, nothing that would have been noticeable. $20 here, $50 there. Then, in the 1990s, he had done something that I did not know my grandfather knew how to do. He had invested. The branch manager explained it to me in his office with the door closed and a cup of coffee I didn't touch going cold on the desk in front of me. My grandfather had, with the help of a financial advisor friend, moved a portion of the account into a brokerage sub-account linked to the savings. He had put money into index funds. He had never touched it. He had let it sit for 37 years. The account balance was $1.9 million. I heard the number. I looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at the branch manager. The branch manager looked at his screen like he wanted to confirm it was still there. "He opened this when I was 6, I said. "Yes, ma'am. He never told me. The account was structured so that you would receive it directly upon his death outside of probate. Your name has been on it since 1987, outside of probate." I didn't fully understand what that meant until Ryan explained it to me in the car afterward. It meant the money did not go through the estate. It meant it could not be contested. It meant that my grandfather had, 37 years ago, set up a structure that protected this money from every person who might have tried to redirect it. He had known. Somehow, for decades, he had known. I didn't tell Trevor. I want to be clear about the timeline because it matters. I found out about the account on a Tuesday. The following Friday, Trevor called me. He was just checking in. He asked how I was doing, how Ryan was doing, whether I'd heard anything from Linda about the estate timeline. His voice had a particular quality that I recognized from childhood. Smooth, slightly too friendly. Trevor's negotiating voice. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that he was in a difficult spot financially, that a business deal had gone sideways, that he'd been hoping Pop's estate might help stabilize things while he sorted it out. He mentioned that Pop's house would need to go through the estate, and did I know anything about the timeline on that? I said I didn't. He mentioned that family should look out for each other. I said I agreed. We hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Ryan came in from the garage and took one look at me and said, "What did he do?" "Nothing yet," I said. "But—" I told Ryan about the call. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We should talk to Linda." Linda was thorough. She had been Pop's attorney for 19 years, and she had, it turned out, very detailed notes about certain conversations she and Pop had in the last 2 years of his life. Notes about Trevor, notes about a property in Decatur, a small rental house that Pop had owned and that, according to the official record, had been vacant and unlisted. It had not been vacant. Trevor had been renting it out for 3 years, quietly, without a formal agreement, to tenants who paid in cashier's checks made out to a property management LLC that Trevor had set up in his own name. The rental income had never been reported to Pop. The tenants, as far as they knew, were dealing with a property management company. Pop had found out 8 months before he died. He had told Linda. Linda had helped him document everything. There was no confrontation. Pop didn't call Trevor, didn't write him a letter, didn't say a word. He just quietly updated his will to leave Trevor a symbolic $1 and added a line to the estate notes that Linda read to me in her office with her hands folded on her desk. "Trevor took from me while I was alive. I am not leaving him more to take when I'm gone. Natalie has always been honest with me. That's worth more than he understands." I had to look at the ceiling for a moment after Linda read that. Then I asked her, "What do we do about the rental income?" She looked at me over her reading glasses. "That's not just a civil matter, Miss Caldwell. Depending on how long it continued and whether it was reported on his tax filings, your brother may have a more serious problem than just an unhappy estate." I asked her what she would recommend. She said she had a colleague she worked with frequently, a CPA who specialized in estate fraud. I told her to make the call. I won't pretend I didn't feel anything. This is the part people always want to skip over in stories like this, the part where the protagonist is supposed to be pure and righteous and entirely certain. I was not certain. Trevor is my brother. We grew up in the same house, shared the back seat of the same station wagon on every family road trip, ate cereal together on Saturday mornings watching cartoons. He also took a letter from a dead man's granddaughter and tore it in half at a funeral. I kept going back to that. Every time I felt the pull of guilt or hesitation, I came back to that moment. 500 people in the room. His hand so casual. The sound of paper tearing. He didn't think I would do anything. He had never thought I would do anything. That was the thing that kept me moving. Linda's colleague, a man named Arthur Chen, who wore bow ties and had an office full of plants, Spent 6 weeks going through Trevor's financial records. He didn't need much from me. Linda had documentation, the property records were public, and once Arthur started pulling on the thread, more things came loose. Trevor had not reported the rental income. 3 years of cashier's checks deposited into an LLC account, not reported on his personal taxes. He had filed those returns himself using software. The IRS, Arthur explained calmly from behind his desk, tends to have opinions about that. There were also questions about the property itself, whether Trevor had ever had formal authority to manage it, whether the LLC had been properly disclosed, whether the tenants had any recourse. "This is going to move slowly," Arthur told me. "These things always do, but they do move." "I'm not in a hurry," I said. That was mostly true. Ryan and I had 3 conversations that I think about often. The first was the night I showed him the taped letter. He said, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." He meant it. That's not a small thing. The second was after the call from Trevor when we sat at the kitchen table and I admitted I was scared. Not of Trevor specifically, but of what came after. The family meetings, my mother's face, the aunts and uncles who would take sides, and the Christmas dinners that would become minefields. Ryan said, "Pop did this for you because he could see who you were. Don't let that be the version of you that folds." The third was after the meeting with Arthur, when I came home and sat on the back porch for an hour and didn't say anything. Ryan brought me a glass of water and sat next to me, and after a while he said, "You're not doing this to Trevor. Trevor did this to Pop. You're just the one who found out." I've thought about that sentence a lot. The IRS process was long and not dramatic. There were no agents at the door, no televised moments. There were letters, and then more letters, and then a process that moved through systems I didn't fully understand, while Arthur kept me informed in steady, patient emails. What was more immediate was the estate. Because of Pop's documentation and Linda's notes, the estate was settled in a way that left Trevor with significantly less than he'd been expecting. The rental property, the one he'd been quietly profiting from, was included in the estate valuation. The income he collected was considered unauthorized. There were conversations about repayment. Trevor did not take this quietly. He called me twice. The first call I let go to voicemail. The message was long and started reasonably and then deteriorated. He said I had manipulated Pop against him. He said I had always been Pop's favorite and used it to my advantage. He said I was tearing the family apart. He did not mention the rental house. He did not mention the tenants. He did not mention the 3 years of cashier's checks to an LLC he had not told anyone about. The second call I picked up, I let him talk for about 90 seconds. Then I said, "Trevor, I found out what you did. Linda found out. Pop found out. He left a note." Silence. I said, "Don't call me again about this. Talk to your attorney." I hung up. My hands were not shaking this time. My mother took a long time to come around. I want to be honest about this because I think in these kinds of stories, the supporting characters are often either purely good or purely bad, and my mother was neither. She was a woman in her 70s who had just lost her father and was now learning that her son had been stealing from him and that her daughter had reported it, and the order in which those facts landed mattered enormously to how she processed them. For the first few months, she was cold with me, not hostile, just distant. She called Trevor more than she called me. She said things like, "I just don't understand why it had to go this far," and "family should handle things privately." I told her I loved her. I told her I understood it was complicated. I told her that Pop had made his wishes very clear and that I had respected them. I did not tell her about the letter for a long time. When I finally did, when I showed her the taped together pages on her kitchen table one afternoon in October, she sat with it for a very long time without speaking. Then she said, "He wrote this about you." Yes. No one was going to hand you anything. She read it again slowly. She was quiet for another minute. Then she said, "He was right, wasn't he?" It wasn't a question. The IRS matter concluded 14 months after Arthur first opened the file. Trevor owed back taxes, penalties, and interest. The number was not small. His attorney negotiated a payment plan. The LLC was dissolved. Sasha left him 6 months after that. Not only because of the money, I think, but the money was the thing that made everything else impossible to ignore. I don't know the details. I only know what my mother told me in careful, neutral sentences that were clearly edited for my benefit. I don't feel victorious about any of that. I want to say that clearly. Sasha had nothing to do with what Trevor did, and whatever happened to her marriage was not something I set in motion. Trevor set it in motion. He set everything in motion. I just stopped moving out of the way. The house I bought is 40 minutes outside of Atlanta. It's not enormous, but it has a screened back porch and a yard large enough for Ryan to have the garden he's always wanted, and a room I turned into a library with built-in shelves and a reading chair that faces the window. It's quiet, it's ours. I think about Pop in that house sometimes, the way he tended things carefully, slowly, over years. How he never needed anyone to know what he was doing. How he trusted that time and patience would do the work that announcements can't. I planted a small vegetable garden in the spring, tomatoes and basil and a row of green beans that did not come up the way I hoped. I'll try again next year. I find that I'm not impatient about it the way I used to be impatient about things. There's something that changes in you when you stop waiting for people to hand you what you deserve and start trusting what's already been put in place for you. Pop knew when I was 6 years old what kind of woman I would need to be. He knew it before I did. He put the foundation down and waited for me to grow into it. I keep the taped letter in a frame now. It hangs in the library, next to the window. The tape is yellowing a little at the edges. Ryan offered once to have it professionally restored, and I told him no. The tape is part of the letter. It's the part that shows what happened to it, and what I did after. I was the woman who taped it back together alone in a bathroom, and went back out and stood straight and didn't say a word. That's the version of myself I want to remember. If you've ever had something taken from you by someone who didn't think you'd do anything about it, who assumed your silence was permission, who mistook your patience for weakness, I want you to know that there is no timeline on what belongs to you. Some things are simply waiting. And the people who tried to throw them away are the ones who will one day have to explain why they thought they could. I'm going to read something that came to me a few months ago. A question someone asked in a comment on one of my videos. They said, "How do you keep going when the person who hurt you is someone you love?" I thought about that for a long time. I think the answer is, you stop asking permission to survive them. What is the hardest thing someone close to you has ever taken? Not an object, not money, but something that couldn't be replaced. I'd really like to know. Leave it in the comments. And if this story stayed with you the way some stories do, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what actually happened in this story. Not the legal part, not the money part, but the mechanics of it. How things unfolded the way they did. Because it wasn't luck, it wasn't coincidence. Everything that happened to Trevor was a direct consequence of choices he made, and everything that came to me was a consequence of choices I made. And I think that's worth sitting with for a minute. Trevor had been taking from Pop for 3 years, quietly, methodically, with the assumption that no one was paying attention, and maybe no one was for a while. But here's what I've come to understand. The things you do in private don't stay private. They accumulate. They show up in documents, in records, in the careful notes of a 19-year attorney who has seen enough to know what she's looking at. Trevor believed that because no one said anything, no one knew. That's not the same thing at all. Pop knew. Pop had known for months before he died, and Pop didn't rage about it, didn't confront him at the dinner table, didn't write Trevor a letter full of accusations. He just quietly updated his documents and trusted that the truth had its own momentum. That's an old kind of wisdom, the kind that doesn't need an audience. I think about the version of me who almost didn't tape that letter back together, who almost left both pieces on that catering table because it was too painful to touch. That woman, the one who had spent her whole life moving out of the way, she would have walked out of that funeral home and never known what was in the letter, and the account would have sat at First Heritage Bank until the state claimed it as unclaimed property, and Trevor would have gone right on assuming that silence was permission. Resilience isn't a dramatic thing. It's not a speech or a confrontation or a moment where you finally stand up and say your piece. Most of the time, it's a strip of Scotch tape in the bottom of your purse and the decision to use it. It's going to the bank even when you're not sure the letter is real. It's calling Linda the next morning when you're still shaking a little. It's telling Ryan the truth by the kitchen light when it would have been easier to keep it to yourself. And honesty, the simple, boring, unglamorous practice of being honest, turned out to be the thing that protected me when I couldn't protect myself. I had been honest with Pop my whole life without ever thinking about it strategically. I wasn't honest because I thought it would pay off. I was just raised to be a certain kind of person, and I stayed that way even when it wasn't convenient. Pop saw it. He saw it when I was 6 years old. He built something around it and waited 37 years for me to find it. That's what I want to carry forward. Not the money, not the outcome, not even the satisfaction of watching the truth come out the way it did. Just the knowledge that the way you move through the world quietly accumulates into something. Every small choice to be decent, to be honest, to put yourself back together in a bathroom when someone has torn you apart. It adds up. It matters, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. Pop built the foundation in 1987 and never told a soul. I'm still learning how to live like that.